Hey, this is Bryant Arnold, also known as Dragon from Skinwalker Ranch, and you're listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, welcome back to That UFO Podcast. As always, my name is Andy, and this is episode 12, where you'll be hearing Calvin Parker retell one of the most famous abduction stories in UFO history. Episode 11 with Buddy from Alien Protocols got some amazing feedback, folks, and I look forward to speaking to Buddy again in the future and hearing some more remote viewers on the podcast as well. This week's Skinwalker Watch Along episode 7 will be dropping with myself and Dan, the penultimate episode. Next week, my guest on the show is none other than Dragon, aka Brian Arnold from Skinwalker Ranch, the head of security. And Dragon will be talking about life on the ranch before the cameras, his lifelong friendship with Brandon Fugel, who now owns the ranch, of course, Season 1 goings on, and a bit of a preview for Season 2 as well. That is an interview definitely not to be missed. You will hear a whole different side of Dragon that you don't necessarily see come across when the cameras are rolling, so definitely not to be missed, folks. New show, TUP Talks, with myself and Dan discussing the main talking points from episode 1 and 2 of Unidentified, will be up sometime this week, folks. That'll go on patreon.com as an exclusive, early access for Patreons, and then drop into the main feeds as well. I've had a ton of stories, thoughts and questions sent over from you, the listeners. Please keep them coming on the Twitter feed at UFO UAPAM. If you're not on Twitter and you do follow the show, then email me. It's UFOUAPAM@gmail.com. And of course, you can message on the Facebook, That UFO Podcast, or That UFO Podcast on Instagram as well. But do consider pledging to the show to keep an eye on future bonus content and just keep the show coming out as regular as possible and in the best quality possible too. But as always, your listens are the most important thing. But if you do want to pledge, it's patreon.com/That UFO Podcast. It's all appreciated, folks. But without further ado, I'm going to play a short message from a friend of the show. It's all about Shadows of Your Mind magazine, a free magazine that you should be downloading and reading. Almost 60 pages of very high quality content with some of the biggest names in UFOs, ufology and more. You also might see a little bit in there this month with myself. I've got a very small piece in there that Dave from Shadows of Your Mind magazine was really kind to include me, and I'm also listed with some other great shows as well for you to find out about. So again, folks, I'll play this short message, and when I come back, you'll be hearing from Calvin Parker.
Have you ever looked up to the skies and seen something you can't explain? Or walked deep in the forest and sensed something watching you? Do you believe in an afterlife? Or a hidden veil that can communicate with the living? Then you need Shadows of Your Mind magazine. Download all issues completely free at shadowsmagazine.co.uk. Shadows of Your Mind, where your search for the answers begins.
Hi everyone, coming back from that message, there are a few names that you think of when you hear UFOs and abductions. Some of the most famous cases throughout history you would say would be the Betty and Barney Hill case, Travis Walton, and I would say the third name up there on that list would be Calvin Parker. And Calvin Parker I have on the line with me just now. Calvin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Beautiful day here in Mississippi, and just kind of kick back and relaxing on a Sunday.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, sir, for giving us some of your time. It's been an absolute pleasure following your story over the last couple of years. I've heard you in a few different interviews in the UK on Howard Hughes, and I've watched your documentary, which is available on Amazon. That's Alien Contact, the Pascagoula UFO Encounter. And of course, you've got the book more recently released as well. So it's been a fascinating story to keep tabs on, and one that we're coming up on the 50th anniversary pretty soon. But the story still is relevant so much today with what's going on. So, Calvin, just before I start asking you about the story and letting you retell it in your words that so many people want to hear, what was your interest, if you had any at all, in UFOs before the incident?
There wasn't any interest. I didn't know what a UFO was. In the 70s, this was not a real popular subject. Everybody kind of shunned anybody that would mention a UFO or something. Of course, we did have Project Blue Book, and I did get to meet Dr. Hynek before he passed away. And that was a great honor and privilege there, because he's one of the ones that made me feel kind of at home with this. But I still didn't talk about it for 45 years. And that's when the book came out.
Yeah, and for me, that's one of the real interests of your story. It's not something that, as we're going to find out, there was also Charles Hickson was involved in the incident with you, and he
Yes,
did
sir.
talk about it much quicker, and he was much more open to discussing it. And throughout his life, this played a big part of his life, but it's something that you shunned away from. But before we get to that, Calvin, in your own words, would you like to tell the listeners your story of what happened on the evening of October 11th, 1973?
I sure would. Of course, I was working in the oil field, just say a day or two before then, and fixed to get married in November, and this happened in October. So I was hunting a different job, something that wasn't so many hours, and I was home, because back then the oil field was 7 days a week. And I just wanted to find a job where I could work and have a normal life. So I called up an old friend of mine, Charles Hickson, and he said, "Look, I'm over at this shipyard, the F.B. Walker and Son shipyard, and you're welcome to come down here and go to work." So October the 11th, the very day, and I've always said, well, I got hired, fired, and a physical all in the same day. I went down and went to work for Charlie. We was getting off work, and Charlie said, "Well, would you like to go fishing?" I said, "Well, sure, because I've known Charlie for a long time. He wasn't really a friend. He was my father's friend, but I known him a long time because we all used to hang around and camp and fish together, me and his children." So I went down. We went to work that morning. He decided he wanted to go fishing, invited me to go. I said, "Well, Charlie, I don't have no fishing equipment with me." He said, "I've got plenty of equipment." Now, for a man from the South to offer you fishing equipment, that's a real honor, because he just soon give you his wife and kids as he had his fishing equipment up. So we got off work. We went by his house, picked up the equipment, and he knew of an old shipyard that was abandoned, Shaw Peters Shipyard, and it was abandoned. He said, "Well, let's go over here and start and try it." Well, in October, it starts getting dark kind of early. So we went over there, and it was a good full moon. The first thing I noticed was trespassing signs on the pier. So I said, "Charlie, it's no trespassing signs all the way around here." "Oh, son, don't pay attention to that." Well, right then I didn't feel real good about it, and I shouldn't have went. But we walked on down to the pier. It took about 15 minutes to get there after we went through the debris and all. Pulled up an old log, was sitting on the pier fishing, and I remember looking out across the river. We was fishing the East Pascagoula River, and there was an old big, it was a Coast Guard cutter or maybe a NOAA ship or something sitting on the other side. And I remember looking at that, thinking to myself, now how can this much steel float? But that's for some reason, that's what was on my mind. And that's when I noticed some hazy blue lights coming from behind me. They looked like they was coming from behind me and reflecting off the water in the front. And I was thinking to myself, well, that's the law, and they come down here to run us off, because that's what the law had on their patrol cars, was some blue lights.
Mm-hmm.
So Charlie and I stood up and turned around about the same time. And about the time we got turned around and was looking behind us, there was a bright, bright light that just covered us. I mean, just encircled us in there. Well, it was kind of blinding there for a minute. I couldn't really see what was going on. But again, I was thinking it could be the law shining a spotlight on us. Well, it wasn't very long. I seen 3 bulky looking creatures, just a figure silhouette of them coming through that light. And I was thinking where they was coming from, that's not the law. got something else fixing to happen here. And two of them went over to Charlie, grabbed him. Then one of them come and grabbed me by my left arm. And that's when I felt an injection going in of some kind, or it was an injection, and later on it got verified, and I kind of got into that in my second book here. But anyhow, he grabbed me by the arm, and it was still hard to make out what this thing looked like. I've always called him the big ugly one, but he moved like a robot. And they took us to the door. I guess I was in front of Charlie because I didn't see him till I got back out on the water again, or the pier.
Can I just ask a question, Calvin?
Sure.
At this point, and this creature, this entity's grabbed you by the arm, were you frozen or paralyzed, or was it just a fear that had come over you that you didn't want to struggle or run away?
Well, when it got me, I wanted to run away. I looked to the left, and it was water, and to the right, and of course, water in the front. There was a lot of debris in it, and it wasn't nowhere to run. But then when he grabbed me by the arm, and I felt this injection, I didn't really care if I got away or not. I was just there. The only thing I could move was roll my head a little bit and roll my eyes. But as far as moving my body, I couldn't move it right then. So this thing carried me to the door of the craft. When I got to the door, I called myself looking to see where these lights was coming from. But they was illuminating out of the paint. You know, it wasn't no big light bulbs or spotlights or nothing. Looked like they was coming out of the paint. So when this big ugly thing carried me in, you know, then the lights was normal. It was just lighting inside the craft. And we made a left turn, went down a hallway for a little bit, and then we made a right turn, and then a big, what I call an examination room. And there was looked like a glass table in there. I could see that, a real nice looking table. And he carried me over, and he laid me on this table on my back, my head up facing the ceiling. And he just laid me down there, and I still couldn't move. And he backed off into a corner and just shut down. And that's why I think it was more or less like a robot taking orders from these other creatures on board here.
And that's something I've heard you say several times in the story, that you had a feeling, an inkling that these creatures were potentially more robotic, just in the way they moved, the way they acted. And as you said, the terminology, that they were almost shutting down for a time as well.
Oh, yeah.
Were there any other features? You know, you've went down this hallway, and you mentioned you're in the craft and the lighting seems normal. Is there any features you can pick out? Anything like a window, or got not pictures hanging on the wall, but any types of hieroglyphs or anything like that?
Not that I could see when I was going in there, except for the glass table. And at this time, I didn't see nobody else but the big ugly one. And he went off in a corner. But when he laid me on the back, I was looking up at the ceiling, and something about the size of a deck of cards that was kind of bluish on bottom come down within 1.5 feet of my head. And it started clicking. It would get right in front of me, it clicked. Then it moved to the side, click, behind me and click, and over to the other side and click. Then it got in front of me and just shot right back up into the ceiling. And that deal was gone. Now, what that was for, I don't have no idea, unless it was taking like x-rays or something like that. I don't know.
What was going through your mind, sorry, at that point? Because this has all happened within now, a few minutes?
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
To be honest, I still didn't have time to think. I just was kind of still numb from the shot, I guess. But I did start thinking a little bit here, just a little bit. That's when I sensed a presence in the room. And I don't know why, but I just sensed that somebody else was in there. So I rolled my head and got my eyes. And out came a female-looking creature. And I call her a female. I don't know if she was or not. I have no clue. But she come toward me, and she looked just like a little redneck girl from my part of the county. I mean, if I'd been a drinking man and out drinking in a bar, I would have probably asked her on a date. That's how real she looked. But the only difference I could tell was her fingers. Her two middle fingers was a little longer. So she come in and she reached up and she grabbed me by the cheek and just kind of felt my skin, kind of like your grandmother would. And I still wasn't too frightened. Then she took one of her hands, put on my chin and pushed it down. She took his fingers off that other hand and run down my throat and tried to curve it up and come up my nasal cavity. That's when I panicked. I couldn't breathe. I was choking. I started bleeding. So I was panicked. And all of a sudden, she pulled her hand out of my mouth and telepathically communicate, we're not going to hurt you. And I thought, but then I thought about the other one. But it was too late. I mean, the damage was done. I mean, my throat was scratched up. She'd already run her fingers down my throat. And she backed off and said, we're not going to hurt you. Well, the pain was real bad then. She made a mumbling noise. Now, I don't know if y'all have alligators in y'all's part of the country or not, but these alligators have a mating call, and it's a vibration, and it goes for miles across the swamp. And that's kind of like the mumbling that she did. And this big, ugly one that was over in the corner, he just jumped up like a jack-in-the-box. He come over and grabbed me by the arm, and that's when I felt another injection go into my arm. And I'll get into later on when we found out it was injections. And this other injection, and it just settled me down a little bit. Well, she just kind of backed up out of the way, and he picked me up, and he carried me back out to almost where they picked us up, set me on the ground. And that's the first time I heard from Charlie. I had lost contact with him. He said, son, you okay? And I thought, well, heck no, I'm not okay, Just been through some kind of trauma in here. I mean, on some bad drugs or some good whiskey. But I didn't do either one back in, or don't now. So anyhow, me and Charlie turned around at the same time and looked, and this thing picked up off the ground just a little bit, shot straight up into the sky and disappeared. Well, Charlie said, well, let's sit down here. The damage is done. Let's sit down here and talk about this for a minute. And he said, we need to tell somebody. I said, Charlie, we don't need to tell nobody nothing, period. We just need to keep this to ourselves and not mention it. Nobody get up in the morning and go to work. He said, no, we got to tell somebody. I says, no, we're not going to tell nobody. So we sat there and talked, then we went back to the car. Well, when we got to the car, I opened my door up, and I noticed his window was shattered in place, and when he opened it, it fell out. The car was kind of magnetic. My keys was kind of sticking to it. So we got in the car, and it took me a while to get it to crank. But I cranked on it and cranked on it and cranked on it, and I noticed the battery never ran down. So we finally got it going, and it wasn't running real good. Backed out. We started in toward his house, and there was a convenience store. And he said, son, pull over here. I need to make a phone call. Well, I thought he was going to call his wife. Back in the 70s, there weren't no cell phones. If it was, you couldn't afford one. There wasn't no social media. They had old pay phones. So he pulled up to this pay phone, and we had to hunt change, some nickels to put in it, in between the car seats. He put it in, and I heard him talking, but I wasn't paying attention to what he was saying. But he was talking to Keesler Air Force Base at the time. And they told him that they didn't handle UFOs or nothing at the present moment they had abandoned that Project Blue Book and all, for him to call the local authorities, which would be the Jackson County Sheriff Department. So he came back to the car. He said, I need some more change. And he looked in there, and I still didn't realize what he was doing. And he called the Jackson County Sheriff Department. Well, like them doing their job, they said, y'all stay there, because they didn't know what kind of condition or shape or what we was doing. Y'all stay right there. We'll be there in a few minutes. He came back and told me what they had said. And I said, why in the world did you call them, Charlie? We wasn't going to tell nobody. But I didn't leave because I didn't want to break the law after them telling us to stay there. I figured they'd pick us up and it would be that much worse. So we stayed there. And, of course, it was on my side of the car because I was driving. They come up and it was two officers. They just kind of turned around and looked in the car and asked me for my driver's license. I pulled them out, showed it to them. They asked me to step out of the car. Now, they was doing this all to me, and Charlie's the one that called them. They said, have you been drinking? I said, no, sir, I hadn't. He said, well, look, walk this line right here, come back, stand on your left foot, I think, tilt your head back, touch your nose, and jump up and down and count from 100 backwards. I said, man, I can't do that sober, much less if I'd been drinking. I said, but I'm going to try it. So I did. And what that was a field sobriety test that he was giving us. He said, well, you look sober enough to drive. I said, well, hell, I am. I hadn't drank nothing. I can drive. So he said, well, follow us to the sheriff's department. So we got into the car and we followed them to the Jackson County Sheriff Department. And that's when they put us in separate rooms and interrogated us. And then they, after the interrogation, they put us into one room. And this is where what they call the secret tape come in. They listened to us talking. And they noticed, there was a little fear in there. And I didn't realize, and Charlie didn't realize, there was a tape recorder in the room. And just about a month ago, I got the whole deal taped, where they interrogated us separately, where they interrogated us in the same room. So anyhow, I didn't realize all these tapes was floating around out there till about a month ago. They, after they put us in the room, the Sheriff Fred Diamond come in. He said, look, I believe something happened to y'all. I want to see y'all in the morning. Why don't y'all go home and get some rest? And I'll see y'all tomorrow. Well, I didn't think no more about it. We went home, got some rest. And I knew I wasn't going back to the sheriff department voluntarily. So we got up the next morning, drove into work. We stopped and ate a little breakfast on the way. Now, this was just my second day of work, and I didn't know how many cars were supposed to be there or not. But when we got there, the place was flooded, and it also had these uplink TV news trucks and all. And I figured that was just maybe a commercial or something they was doing. I never related it back to us. We brassed in, went to our workstations, got a call over the intercom for us to come to the main office. I thought, oh gosh, here we go. Charlie's big mouth, he opened it. Well, right then I quit speaking to him very much. We went to the office, and of course they said, y'all gonna have to give a press release. I said, why? Press release for what? I was still denying that this happened. And they hemmed up. They said, y'all got to do it. We cannot conduct business here anymore. The media is driving us crazy. They got TV crews here. We have a shipyard attorney. His name is Joe Caminglo. Joe Caminglo. That's a tongue tire. Joe Flamingo, and we're going to have him come work up a press release. So Charlie got with Joe, and they worked up a press release, and they turned loose of a press release. Well, about that time, the sheriff came in, Fred Diamond, and I had expressed some concerns to him that we might be contaminated or might have radiation or have some kind of virus or something. Because I had watched the Apollo missions, and I knew when they came back, they quarantined them from their families and all for 7 days. And that's what I was thinking. So the sheriff come up, he said, I need to get y'all to the hospital and get you checked out. He drove us to Singing River Hospital in Jackson County, Pascagoula. They, Dr. Bosco, I won't never forget the man's name. He checked us out, did blood work. He did a whole line of work there. And he asked, he examined our arm, and come to find out that was a shot that they gave. Now, I never asked him what it was that was in that shot because I got the heck out of there later on. But it was definitely a shot of some kind of sedative or something, I guess. Well, when we left there, the sheriff said, we need to take y'all to Keesler Air Force Base. They called, they want to check y'all for radiation. Well, I thought that was really weird too. So he drove us 30 miles to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi. They flagged us right through the gate, had MPs escort us back to the docks. And when we got out, they told everybody else to step away. They had men in hazmat suits with something in their hand, got us and checked us for radiation. Of course, I was showing up a little bit, but not enough to be way above normal. And Charlie didn't check when, he didn't have none. They got through and they said, all clear. They said, now they want to see y'all in the conference room. Walk straight down this hall. It's all the way to the end. I guess that was the longest walk I've ever made in my life. It had to be 3 or 4 football lengths back there. And I was scared then because I had time to think of everything, and I was kind of getting panicked. So we got back, and sure enough, there was Air Force officials, some Navy officials. Then it was all of our local mayors and 3 local mayors, 3 local police chiefs. And they kind of wanted us to tell the story. Well, I more or less just kind of clammed up and still trying to deny that anything happened. Of course, Charlie, he jumped on the bandwagon. That was his 5 minutes of fame, so he wanted to tell them everything.
And can I just ask Calvin? Sorry. And what did Charlie tell them?
He told them more or less everything that had happened to us.
And was his experience at that point the exact same as yours?
No. No, it was a little bit different. The big ugly one, except he had 2 big ugly ones. And then they took him aboard and examined him. And he mentioned something about a big eye. Now, I don't know if he was talking about the eye of a TV camera or something that had examined him, where I had something kind of sort of like a deck of cards. But, I've never really heard his interviews, so I really can't tell you. Charlie had written a book shortly after that, and I never read the book. Matter of fact, my publisher, Philip Mantle, sent me a copy of his book, and I still hadn't picked it up and read it yet. Because I'm still a little upset at him, even though he's dead, for breaking the news like that. Because if he hadn't run his mouth, then there wouldn't be no books, no story, and I'd have an average life like I kind of wanted it. So when they got through with us, they said, well, y'all can go. So the sheriff and the deputy that was with us, we all went back to the car, got in the car. And the sheriff said, you got one more stop to make if somebody want to see you when you get there. Well, I didn't realize, I didn't know who Dr. Hynek was or Dr. Harder. But when we got back to the shipyard, Dr. Hynek was there, which was over Project Blue Wolf. And he sat down and Charlie went back with Harder and he gave him an examination. I went in there with Hynek first. And Dr. Hynek, for some reason, had a common effect on me, made me feel like I could talk to somebody about this. And for some reason, I opened up with Dr. Hynek back in and stayed in touch with him up until he died. And now I'm still really good friends with his son, Paul Hynek. Matter of fact, we was just on the phone yesterday talking. But I spilled the beans to Dr. Hynek. He said, if you would, run back by here tomorrow. I'm going to run out to where this happened. And before you leave, because I told him, I'm leaving, going back home. To heck with all this. So we went home, got a good night's sleep. Well, really didn't sleep, but, was in our own beds. And got up and went to work the next day. I sat there and visited Hynek, and he was upset about the sheriff department or nobody blocking off the scene where it was a crime. And it was a crime out there. So I told him, look, I'm leaving. Well, he gave me his phone number before I left. He said, anytime you need to talk or if you think of something else or you just want to talk and it don't matter what it's about, call me. So I went out, got in my car. I already had my bags. I pointed it for Laurel, Mississippi, which was 107 miles from there. And I went home because I hadn't seen my family or told them about it yet. But I had no intentions of telling my family about it. And I didn't until 46 years later when we wrote the book. And since the one book come out a year ago, there's been another book come out that we wrote because it was so much enthusiasm. And the first book, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, my story, Calvin Parker, there was so many witnesses and all come forward that had to do another book. And we just, instead of putting it in the first book and pulling it out, because that wouldn't be fair to the people that had already bought it, there's another book that's just as big as that. And it's the story continues, new witnesses, new evidence. But anyhow, I left and got home to my family. They never asked me about it. I never mentioned it. I was engaged to get married in November. I stayed home, got a job. November 9th, we got married, me and my wife. And I have to say, it hadn't been an easy road with this because the news media wouldn't leave me alone. When they did say something, they wouldn't tell me the truth about it or tell the truth about it. And matter of fact, that's how the book come up, because of the lying-ass news media. But up until 2018, when the first book come out, I never talked about this to anybody, not my friends, not my family, not my wife. And somebody said, well, how can you keep it from your wife for 46 years? Well, it was easy. You just don't talk about it. And she knows me good enough that I wasn't going to talk about it. And what brought all this on, we had a neighbor that passed away in the neighborhood, and he was a friend. So we went to his wake at the funeral home. And I signed a register with my real name that day. And that was, well, I can't say it was a mistake because it's probably one of the better things that's happened to me. Well, people started coming up and asking me all these questions. They recognized the name. So, told them, we can't talk about this here. This man's wife grieving, her daughter's grieving, and I'm not going to do a damn photo shoot up here in a funeral home. So we left, and on the way home, my wife said, well, look, you've never talked to me about this. You never told me about it or anything, or nobody else. They just want to know how you are. They care about you and what's going on in your life and all. Well, by that time, had retired, and she said, why don't you write a book? I said, well, I'll think about it, which I wasn't going to do it because I didn't have the education to write a book. I don't know. I couldn't spell my own name, much less punctuate it. And I said, well, let me think about it. Well, it happened the next day. Martin Willis, that does a little podcast, called. He said, there's a guy that's been wanting to get a hold of you. Can I give him your contact information? He said he just won't give up. I said, sure, Martin, I'll talk to him just to get him off you. And it was Philip Banham. And he called me on my phone, introduced himself. Of course, I answered the phone when he called. I seen it was from overseas somewhere. And he said, we talked for a little bit. He said, Calvin, why don't you do your own book? So I told him, I don't have the education to do my book. He said, well, I'm here for you if you need me, if you need some help. I said, Philip, the reason I hadn't is because everybody changes everything that I say. I can tell them one story, and they go make another complete story out of that one. He said, well, think about it. He said, now, here's the deal. That could be your legacy, and they can't change black and white what you say. And I got to thinking, it made a lot of sense. Now, he didn't even call me about writing a book. He just wanted to talk to me about one that Charlie had, and which one I've never read, so I couldn't really tell him nothing about it. He said, well, I'll call you back in a week. I said, all right. Well, right then when he hung up, I got that phone number that he called from. I put no answer on the number. So I didn't have intentions of talking to him again, but he's pretty persistent. I was down at the boat loading my boat up on the trailer, and the phone kept ringing. It kept ringing. It kept ringing. And I finally just answered it without looking, and it was Philip. I didn't want to be rude and hang up on the guy. So we talked for a few minutes, and I told him, I said, look, Philip, here's the deal. We can do a book. I've never done one. I don't have any education. But number one, I know it's going to be some misspelled words because I can't spell my name. I know that sentences ain't going to be punctuated because I never did good in literature. Said, so I don't want it edited, period. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure about this, Philip. I said, so if you don't edit the book, we'll do it. Well, I went home, told my wife, well, you're going to get your damn book and you're going to hear your story. Still, I hadn't never told her the story, and she was all excited about this book. So Philip and I, we communicated on the computer. If I had a question, he sent me a format to go by. And if I had a question, all I had to do was ask him, and he would help out. But he's always been good to his word. He's never edited but one thing in this book, and I was talking about eating a fried bologna sandwich, and he called it a fried blondie sandwich. Now, I don't know the difference there, but that was the only word he changed, and it's kind of funny. But I did the book, and I figured, maybe this thing might sell 10 copies, and I'd buy all 10 of them, hand out to my family, my friends, and that's what I did. And that's where my wife first heard about what was going on with me and my family and my friends.
And what was her reaction?
She was shocked and still is. The other day, she listened to them tapes that I made at the sheriff department. And I walked back there, and she just broke down and started crying. But, it's nothing unusual for her to hear something different. And she starts crying about it. She said, I didn't know you've been going through this for all these years. I said, well, really, I tried to block it out of my mind, but people would more or less wouldn't let me block it out. It cost me. My original goal in life was to buy a house, get married, buy a house, have children, have grandchildren, retire and fish. And, that's messed the whole thing up. So, I ended up buying a house and fishing, but that's about it. I have children, but, I don't never talk to them about it. I give them a copy of the book like I did my wife. If you want to read it, read it. If you don't. If you don't believe me, that's fine. I don't care.
And did they have any questions about the incident? Have they read it? Have they followed it up?
Yeah, they've read it, and my daughter didn't have a whole lot of questions, but her husband and father-in-law had a few. And, every now and then they call and ask a few questions. But, and it's nothing really serious questions that they ask, but they just want to know something, clarify something. Like, we got 2 hypnosis. We got the Bud Hopkins hypnosis in one book, Kathleen Martin in the other book. She wasn't in the first book, but she was really professional and did a great job. That was a 3-hour session. And, she went about it different. She didn't put no leading questions in there. She would just ask me, and then what, or something like that. So, there's been a lot of things cleared up since the first book that I didn't even realize. And Philip and I has talked, and we never know what comes up from day to day. It's always something coming up and that we have to deal with or want to deal with sometime. But it's been a good haul for me. It brought my wife and I a lot closer. I know last year, of course, we hadn't this year because of this virus, but we made a lot of conferences last year, met a lot of great people, and got to talk to a lot of people. And that's been nice. Well, I got to meet Kathleen at the conference before she flew down here to hypnotize me. Got to meet Paul Hynek at a conference. I've been talking to him all this time, but I never got a chance to meet him. And he is really such a pleasant person to be around. I like Paul a lot. And he's intelligent, he's smart. Of course, I wouldn't tell him that. I tell him, those old dumbass rednecks a lot smarter than you are. But it's been a good go. It's brought us closer.
Calvin, listening to that story, I wanted to try and let you talk as much as possible because it is your story and it is genuinely one of the most fascinating in the UFO topic. What I've got, though, is some questions to go back, just going through for you. The first thing I want to talk about, so obviously Charlie Hickson played a big part in this, and as you've stated previously and on this interview, you just stopped talking to Charlie after the incident, and he went his way and told his story, and he done various interviews in the media. He released books, and like you say, you really had 45 years where this was locked away. You didn't want to discuss it. You didn't want it to be part of your life. You wanted to get on with things. He's said in the past that you were passed out for most of the incident, when of course that's not been the case. What sort of happened there? Was it a bit of a miscommunication, or do you think he was trying to just not involve you in the story as much?
Well, Charlie and I sat down and agreed that I wasn't going to talk about this to start with. So in this matter right here, we had talked about, maybe I'd passed out or something like that. And he just took that and run with it, and which I'm glad he did. And a lot of people question my credibility on this, but like I said before, I don't care if they question it or not. This is what happened. I wouldn't have put it in black and white if it hadn't been the truth.
Calvin, I'll be honest. I absolutely do believe your story. Let's say it's a story. This is an event. This is something that happened that's very profound and hard for a lot of people to believe. But in this subject and topic in general, I don't think there's any stories that are easy to believe, really, even with the evidence and the weight of testimony we've got now.
Oh, yeah.
But you definitely come across like a really credible and honest person. And like you say, if people want to believe you, great. If they don't, and that's also fine. That's nothing that you particularly care about.
You know, I once told somebody that I don't want everybody to believe everything that I say or anything that I say. I like for people to have their own minds, to think for themselves, and to be able to put all this into one little box for them. I know on my part, I know for a fact what happened is what I said. And I know something else. The reason I made all these conferences was to look for answers with other people and all. And that's always been why. And people handle things different. And I really hate that I didn't communicate more with Charlie. I mean, we had some communication, but it wasn't all real good. And I hate that. He died with maybe some secrets in his head that I needed to know. But
and that's something you can't go back now. But what you're doing going forward, obviously, is bringing out your story, letting people meet you, and not only you getting answers, but people meeting you that might be helping them that have maybe had similar experiences as well. I believe you met Travis Walton. Was it last year at one of the conferences?
Yeah, I met him at the in Arizona UFO Congress. And we got to spend some time together. And I kind of enjoyed this time. But he's like me. Even though he come out with a lot of publicity with this movie and all, he's still kind of withdrawn and don't like talking about it that much.
What did you discuss? Not to go in too much private conversation, but did you both discuss your own incidents and any similarities that may have been there?
No, we mostly discussed the news media. And we had a talk about people in general, how people accepted each one of us in general. And that's pretty much lined it up.
You're a very religious man. That's something that comes across in a lot of your interviews, and you've never hidden that. Does this incident or event conflict at all with that religious part of your life or your family when you were younger? And is that maybe one of the reasons you kept this hidden?
Yeah, because I just didn't want to talk about it back then. It was just say kind of like a rape victim, you know, they get that. And a lot of them don't want to talk. They don't want to be put out there. And that's kind of what I felt like. You know, I didn't want to just throw this out there and people to start doubting me and doubt my family. I don't care they doubt me, but I didn't want to put my family in the middle of all this, although I did for years. And now we're way deep in it.
So as you were growing up, like you said, this is something that you kept hidden away, and Charlie went his route with it, doing the interviews, the TV, magazines, that sort of thing. Was there ever any other incidents in your life? Did you ever see anything in the sky? Ever get any feelings that something was watching you still or keeping tabs on you? Anything at all?
Well, I had a feeling for a long time that, you know, maybe something was keeping tabs. But, you know, when you get paranoid about something or think something, and you can convince yourself into believing things that might not be. And then I listen to other people's stories, and they talk about having something to track them in them and stuff like that. Well, I really do think for a while that they had implants in me. And the reason I say that, because after this happened, my nose bled quite regular for a long time. I mean, it's all stopped now, but I think they did have something in my nose.
That was that was one of the questions one of the listeners, Stephen, had asked. Were you ever checked over for implants? Was it something you ever got checked officially?
Not really, but I tell you, I had a bunch of MRIs. I had 2 open heart surgeries and a stroke, and they've done MRIs all the time since then. They hadn't found nothing yet, and I'm glad they didn't.
Yeah, I was going to say that's good to know. You don't want necessarily something found. Might be good for the story for other people, but you're still a person that's got to live their life. Can I just ask you? You mentioned before about the tapes that you've just found last month. What's your plan with those tapes?
Beg your pardon?
Do you have any plans for those tapes to release them?
Yeah, they own. Let's see. There's a guy, Brian Broom, did a whole article on them tapes, and matter of fact, he put them on my Facebook page. I don't even know where they are. They're somewhere on my Facebook page, and it's the whole tapes.
So I've not actually heard those. That's good. I'll put the link to those within the interview. Do you ever think there was a reason that you were picked and Charlie were picked, or chosen, or abducted, or do you think it was just you were in the wrong place at the right time, or vice versa?
Well, that's something I've often asked myself, and maybe I was just at the wrong place at the right time. It's hard to say.
I know at the time there was no one else had come forward, but like you say in the documentary and the follow-up book, there were witnesses, weren't there, that actually saw the craft or the ship that
plenty
evening
of witnesses
that came forward. Yeah.
Yes, sir. It was plenty of witnesses, and a lot of them was law enforcement that had seen this thing land. And then we had a couple, Maria Blair and her husband, and they was across the river, and they seen it land and seen them take us on board. Now, he just passed away not long ago, and he did a confession on his deathbed about that, apologizing to his wife for never letting her tell nobody. But, all the witnesses are real credible witnesses that were there that night. We got several more right from around here that seen the craft when it landed. We had a probation officer. We had a preacher. We had some people from the Pascagoula Police Department that witnessed it. So, and they all in the second book, the story continues. And it's pretty interesting to read. It's too much of it to go into right now, but it's some good reading in there.
No,
I prefer the second book better than I do the first.
No, and the both books and the documentary all available on Amazon. I would recommend anyone gets in there to investigate themselves and, like you've said, make up their own mind. Calvin, I'm going to ask, before I get to some listener questions, if you could go back to that evening and stop the event from happening, would you?
I would, because my life would be totally different right now. So, yeah, I would. I wouldn't do it again.
So there is obviously not a regret, because it's not something you could have any control over, but it's something that you're obviously quite traumatic as well. But going forward, do you plan to keep up the conventions and getting yourself out there and speaking to people? Is it a bit of a therapy for you now? Obviously, your wife has got you to write these books, and do you feel more comfortable now putting yourself out there?
Well, I do. And, I wouldn't mind making maybe a couple of conventions a year, because like I said, 2 reasons. I'm still hunting the trigger on all this, or the answers. And the other reason, my wife enjoys them. So me keeping this from her for all these years, if I could take her to a couple of conventions and make her happy, then that's good. We get a room, we go down, we talk to the people. It gives her a better understanding on what's going on.
What I would like to ask is, you never had an interest in UFOs or this topic before this, and it's something you've maybe kind of stayed away from till recently. How up to date are you with things like To the Stars Academy or the New York Times article where they released the 3 videos? Have you seen those 3 videos of the unidentified craft that the government shown?
No, sir, I hadn't.
And have you still not saw those?
Uh-uh. No, I don't watch that. I mean, we got the History Channel here that puts all this stuff up, Ancient Alien and all. And unless I really know somebody that I'm in at a convention and I want to see them and I know they own, then I'll watch that. But I don't really get into it. I don't really watch it. Well, I'm not much on TV, on the news or politics or anything else. I feel like the world would be better off without politicians and the news media. Get rid of them two things and a lot of our problems would disappear.
So what I want to do, Calvin, is just get into some listener questions. We had quite a few sent over, but you've answered a few of them anyway throughout the body of the story, of course. Stephen, first up, wanted to know, what are your thoughts on the recent Nimitz encounters and related videos? But of course, you've answered that already, so thanks for sending it in, Stephen. You hadn't seen those. He'd also asked if you'd checked for implants. A few other questions we had. Were you given any information at the time of the event that you didn't quite realise at the time and came back later? So that's probably looking more at the regression and the hypnosis sessions.
To be honest, I really don't know of any useful information I was given. On the hypnosis session, it's just to bring out the finer details in what did happen.
And was there anything at all within those details that surprised you, or?
Yeah, it was. We got like color of clothing down to. I thought it was like a redneck woman, but it could have been somebody in disguise. And and I still call her a woman, but it might not have been. So I don't know. It's just stuff we had talked about. But
that's interesting. One of the more recent theories has been that the phenomena or any entities, whatever they may be, can actually make you see an image or project an image that you'd be comfortable seeing. So that's interesting that you say you saw a redneck woman, but that's something that you'd be more comfortable with necessarily than, a 10-foot tall grey alien or, whatever it could have been. So that's similar parallels to what other people have reported. He also asked, this is slightly different, but Spike has heard you told a story on interviews where you found a guy sleeping on your porch once, and instead of shooting him, you invited him in for coffee.
Yes, sir, that's true. Yeah, and that's quite regular that I find somebody waiting outside to talk to me or see me. And, this guy I found on my porch, I woke him up, invited him in. We had coffee, we fixed breakfast, and we talked. And the same way, I try to be that way with most anybody that comes here, but, times is getting kind of scary now to have your family around and all. But I've had people waiting out in my parking lot just to talk to me, be out there in the hot sun. And you walk outside and there they are waiting. I said, well, why didn't you come in, knock on the door and come on in the air conditioner? Brought them in and talked. So, I don't meet too many strangers. I've always got people sending things they want me to autograph, and I'll do that and send it back, sometime with my own postage. And then one time I caught somebody selling them on eBay. So I just got the name and stopped autographing things for them. I love people, but I'm not going to be taken advantage of.
So, no, absolutely not. Listen, Calvin, we're going to just wrap up there. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time. It's been amazing speaking with you and hearing your story one-to-one as well. It's been quite incredible. So do you just want to tell the listeners once again the books that they can get and where they can get those?
All right. We got Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story, Calvin Parker. Then we have The Story Continues, New Evidence and New Witnesses. And they're both at Amazon, the little documentary things at Amazon. And you can get them through them.
Excellent. Calvin, it's a fascinating story, and I, for one, I'm glad that you're out there doing the UFO circuit, if you want to call it that. And obviously it's on hold a little bit just now with COVID-19, but hopefully when things are back up and running, we get to see you one day, maybe even meet in person as well.
That'd be great. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
No, it's been lovely speaking with you. Thank you, Calvin.
Thank you.
That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditative gamma state full on meta. You can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called up my boys, they thought this was noise, they thought it was a dream, they thought it was my toys, they thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I'd be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jay? If we're being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider your eyes. It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.
What's that in the class between that sun and moon? Got sleep paralysis and got within my room.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.
What's that in the class between that sun and moon?